Please give a warm welcome to producer-director Morgan Neville and Steve Martin.
Hi, thank you. Wow. Wow. Can you hear me? Oh.
Of course we can.
Let me just say first, I prefer older historic theaters.
Well,
I've never been in here. This is fantastic. I've never been in this park. I should be. I'm going to do it one day.
Well, I grew up going to this theater, so I grew up in Santa Barbara, and yeah.
Have you really grown up?
Well,
This
ask
is the
my
director,
wife.
Morgan
Yeah,
Neville,
ask
by
my
the way.
kids.
Well, you came to this movie theater when there were rats and there was a cat
No,
in the
it was a
building?
revival theater. I remember seeing Marx Brothers movies in this theater, and then this theater particularly had ups and downs.
How old are you? Marx Brothers. Yeah.
It wasn't first run.
I met Columbus here. Yeah.
Morgan, thanks for being back. And I've been a huge admirer of yours. And this piece, when I introduced the film, I said it was two pieces. And one is called, Then, and the second half is called Now. But what blew me away was that the one that looks back, it actually unfolds present tense. It feels very immediate in the moment. Can you tell us about that dynamic where the second half, which is called Now, feels very retrospective, that we're kind of looking back? And I find that dynamic extremely interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that came out of the process of making the film. So when we started, we didn't know what the shape was going to be in the beginning. And fortunately, we had started in the beginning with A24, and they said, just work on it till you figure it out. And so two different things started happening. I was digging into Steve's archive and looking up footage, and there was so much of that story, and I loved that story. And the story of this first film is a lot of what Steve also wrote about in his memoir, and that was a kind of immersive story there. And then at the same time, Steve invited me to come film him doing things in his life today, and the person I was
I didn't invite you. You asked.
okay.
Yeah, but what am I supposed to do? I'm not doing an interview for my own documentary, I'll tell you that. Anyway.
But I think the first shoot we did was up here in Santa Barbara.
I think it was.
When Marty...
With Marty and my wife, who appeared on... Yeah, I got... Larry Kasdan called me after he saw it, and he said, I'll tell you who the star of your documentary is. Your wife. And she's not a show business person. She's just classy,
But putting together the documentary, the aspect of you keeping it present, that we're uncovering things in the first half was...
Well, I mean, so a couple things. Once I realized there was enough material to do it just with archive, where you don't see Steve or present-day people reflecting back, it feels more in the moment in that way. And then there were things along the way that we found, like Steve's diary, that really allowed us to be in the moment in a way.
Call it a journal.
Journal,
yeah.
Okay. And the second part, if you haven't seen the second part, anybody, it's totally different from this part. So I encourage you.
A warning, if you go home and watch the second part, it opens with 2 minutes of poaching eggs. So, but it gets better, I would say. I'd be interested in knowing why you chose to open with me poaching eggs.
I think because after this, my favorite edit in this whole project is the edit from the end of the first film to the beginning of the second film, because we haven't seen you, or you've always kind of almost behind a curtain, and then suddenly we're there doing this very mundane thing.
Mundane?
Well, artistically mundane thing, and it just kind of reestablishes the rules for the next film.
I I haven't seen both films, and everybody's going to go home and watch the second half, correct? The audience has to do work in the sense that we have to find the connections and we have to understand how they work together. Was that always your intention for?
I mean, I'm a huge believer in making the audience work, and I feel like asking questions is a huge part of my storytelling always, kind of let the audience make up their own mind about things. I think the second film does even more than the first film in terms of the questions we're asking. Because I think in the process of asking questions, not only are you an engaged viewer, but you start to think about your own answers and your own self in asking those questions.
Steve, a huge fan of yours since forever. But what I got out of this documentary that everybody just saw now, and it makes me admire you even more, is the perseverance, the conviction that drove you for 15 years of not succeeding to continue moving forward.
Well, one thing, perseverance is all I had. I wasn't like especially talented, I couldn't sing, I couldn't dance,
So you're not talented.
Well, my whole life is workarounds. I mean, I can't sing, so I'll pretend I can sing. I mean, Carl Reiner once told me, he said, "You're like a guy who looked at Fred Astaire dance and said, I can do that." But what I like about this is, I can't make sense of my own life or my own interests. So here is somebody who's going to make sense of it for you or for other, maybe me. It's like I couldn't have organized this. I wouldn't know. I mean, there was an album by a person I admire, Meredith Willson, who wrote The Music Man. And he made an album, and its title was "And Then I Wrote." And I always thought, I can't be saying that. And then I did this,
Grabbing onto what I just mentioned about the themes that are so strong in your documentary, Morgan. Him struggling to find his voice, the perseverance. Also, there are big themes about what it means to be successful, et cetera. We're used to seeing documentaries about famous people that is just biographical, but you have latched on to relatable themes in your documentary that are very strong. Was that always your North Star?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to, I really kind of am allergic to what I call the kind of Wikipedia version of storytelling, which is checking boxes, and then he did this, and then they did this, and that it's really looking for a shape of a story. And fortunately, with this first part, again, Steve had really done a lot of work in shaping the story in his memoir, which to me was kind of one of the great comedic memoirs. I remember reading it at the time and thinking, God, this would make a great documentary.
I wrote a lot of it here in Santa Barbara, actually,
Yeah.
that book called Born Standing Up.
But it was interesting because the narrative shape, it's a great book. If you haven't read it, you should absolutely read it. And even the audiobook, which Steve reads, is particularly good too. But the shape of a narrative in the early part of his story was the thing that helped me see it. I mean, the interesting thing is in the memoir, 70% of the memoir is before you make it.
Right.
And
well, that's based on my belief that the most interesting part of a career is before you have a success, my memoir ends with a success, and then that part is over. And but I would read biographies and they'd say, and then I went to high school, and then I went to college, and then I got a Mary Tyler Moore show. I go, wait, how'd you do that? Where'd you go from there to there? And I wanted to tell that incremental story of the footsteps you took to get into even the audition. There was one audition I did. I don't think we had talked about it. It's in the early 70s, and I was auditioning for the Dean Martin summer show. And, you know, I had this kind of crazy act with balloons and everything. And the way it worked is I went in and auditioned for his as assistant. And then the assistant went in and did my act for Dean. I didn't get it.
Didn't you go on a date with Dean's daughter?
I did. I won a date with her on the dating game. Yes. And we went to Dina Martin, very nice. And we went to Portofino, Italy. Wow. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And no.
You focus, Morgan, a lot in both parts. You focus on the failures, and it's something that I found it very inspiring. Was it hard for you to keep your admiration in check while you were going through the process? Because we're all in awe of this man.
Yeah, that's why I just concentrated on the failures all the time.
Yeah.
No, I mean, failure is, as we all know, that's where you learn real lessons. You know, I think the two things I really gravitated towards in films, Steve's film career in the second film, is the films he wrote, because those actually, to me, say a lot about what he was thinking about and wanted to say, and the films that didn't work. You know, films that he believed in for different reasons, Pennies from Heaven being one of them, which has been reappraised over time, absolutely. And I remember seeing in the theater when it came out, because I was a 12-year-old who would love The Jerk, and I was a little confused.
That'd be a surprise.
Yes, I was.
Yeah, thinking you're going to get The Jerk too,
Yeah.
and see Pennies from Heaven.
So yeah, it made sense, you know, to go into those stories, because I think it's part of, in Steve's narrative, how I see Steve's narrative, it affected him more than the yet another successful comedy.
Lauren Michaels told me, he said, I always like to hire someone when they're coming off a failure, because then they're really energized.
And Morgan, the aspect of how different the two documentaries are style-wise, was that something that came about during the process, or you always set up to do two?
Well, when I had, you know, there was this contemporary kind of more verite documentary that I happened to be filming, and then there was this archival story, and the typical documentary thing might be to cut back and forth. But there are all kinds of problems with that in terms of, you know, the mechanics of that, and you're always missing the other timeline. And I just thought, what if I just make two different films? And so I hired two different editors who weren't allowed to look at the other film. I hired two different composers, two different graphics people. Like, I really made them separately.
Two different subjects.
Well, in a way, yes.
Yeah. Well,
you know,
yeah, that's
because
true.
who you were there and who you are now, and it's the kind of the duality of it. And even now I think about, like, the Steve Martin brothers. There was a duality even then, you know, in terms of...
That's an album I did called the Steve Martin Brothers. And it was when it was released when I was completely out of material. And so one side was the dregs of my stand-up comedy act, and the other side was banjo music. So.
The first half, you mentioned the archives. The first half feels almost archaeological. You're like digging into the past. Where does all this archive come from? Is that something that you had to dig in, or this gentleman had it in his basement?
A bit of everything. The basement did have a lot. But there were other things, you know, it probably took more than a year for us to find your old black and white footage from that. You had a early video camera, so the footage of you.
Right. I'm not even sure what happened. How you got. I mean, it ended up. I shot it.
Yeah.
And then it ended up at my manager's house somehow. So I don't know how that happened. Maybe I don't remember. I might have. They were Betamax, tapes.
Even before Betamax,
Yeah,
it is
was it?
19.
Oh, yeah, it was a reel-to-reel,
71.
that's right,
Yeah,
reel-to-reel
so
carried
so
this
things
big
like
thing.
that, it is archaeological in that way. But then the other part is just the discovery part. It's kind of going in without preconceptions and just seeing what happens and reacting to that. I think a big part of me going into any project is just having no agenda, just trying to listen and learn as much as I can and sift through everything and look for shapes.
And also, you'll never be more afraid than when you have a thorough researcher go through your life.
On that note, what made you agree to open up to Mr. Neville?
Well, there's one is like, well, if not now. But mainly I admired Morgan's work. I loved Won't You Be My Neighbor? I thought it was fantastic. And I loved the way he treated Mr. Rogers, with such great respect. And also it formed you came away going, wow, Mr. Rogers was fantastic. He was great. He was so deep. And I thought, maybe that can happen to me.
Go ahead.
There's just, because we're here in Santa Barbara, Steve's had a house here for a long time, and I grew up here, and we had one connection that I should just mention because we're here, which is Steve's house was, growing up, it was my best friend's house. So I played in this house all the time, and the first time I came to your house,
I said, don't play. All this is expensive stuff, so don't play. Yeah, were you shocked? Or did you know ahead
I
of
knew.
time?
I mean, I kind of revealed to you that I used to play in this house all the time, and I remember falling off the bike right over there, and it was just.
So
it
you're
was
going to now sue? Oh, okay,
Yes.
got it. Wow.
Statute of limitations
Great,
is
yeah.
not expired.
You mentioned Won't You Be My Neighbor, and then you also did Anthony Bourdain documentary. And I'd love to hear from you the through line. I've seen a through line. You commit to people that are struggling, honing their voices, and their perseverance in all three of them. To you?
I mean, to me, I'm just interested in creative people. I think ultimately that creative process, how we all find our voice and trying to hang on to it and how that changes over time. I mean, that's endlessly fascinating to me, and it's taken me a long time retrospectively to look back and be like, oh, that's what I've been doing. That's the thing I'm gravitating towards again and again, is trying to kind of understand creative people like you, Steve.
And I'm curious, Steve, were you involved in the process? Were you watching dailies? Were you seeing cuts?
No, one of my dictums to myself was I'm just not going to be involved. I'm going to step back and let someone else take it all and assemble it, and put it together and see what there is there. Because if I'm sort of guiding it, it becomes something else. I mean, who wants that? I'll do one. Don't worry.
And what was it like watching when you finally got to see the final product?
It's a very hard question to answer because I wasn't anxious. I saw the first part in a theater with you, like when it was premiering, and I thought, well, it's good. But the second part, I saw in an early stage, and then I went, I've seen it now enough. I don't really know what ended up. I will watch it one day. I have watched it, but you're just watching yourself. I mean, and you already said it. You already know what you said, and and I was, after I did the Tonight Show like 5 times, and you think you get this traction. Did I tell this story in here? I don't know. You think you get a traction like, oh, I did the Tonight Show, now I'm famous, and then you're not famous. You're just, nobody goes, oh, were you at that party last night? I don't remember. And so after, 5 times, I went into an antique store on La Cienega Boulevard, and the woman looked at me and said, "Were you that boy that was on the Tonight Show last night?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Ugh." So that's what I'm worried about, looking at myself. Going, ugh.
I will say when Steve watched, I think, the first part, I got the greatest compliment from him as a documentary filmmaker, which you sent me an email and said, "Loved it," and then 10 minutes later an email that said, "Can I show it to my shrink?"
And what did your shrink say?
Well, I was out of shrink world at that time. No, he was my ex-shrink, so because I'm perfect, so.
Had you bought all along the 2 parts and how unconventional the storytelling will be with the 2 parts? It's to you, Steve. Yeah.
Did you buy into it?
I was happy just to leave it to you. What I say is we spent 3 years working on this project and 3 seconds naming it. Steve.
Yes.
Exclamation point.
Yeah, well, I added that, Actually, it came from a thing I did in Las Vegas, sort of at the height of my stand-up career, and I thought it'd be funny to put on the big marquee out front. It says big letters, Steve, and then in parentheses it says Martin.
Which actually leads me to a question I wanted to ask. The first half, your stand-up, you're not a joke person, but then in the second half, you and Martin Short are working on jokes.
Yeah, that's the biggest change, I'd say, because I didn't know how to write jokes, although I was a writer for a television show before all this started, but not for myself. And the premise was, I'm not going to do jokes, as you probably saw up there. So I'm not going to do that. But that's the biggest change in my life right now. Now it's all jokes, and I love jokes, and I love working with Marty because we just play off each other. And, they're not all like one-liner jokes, but they're sort of riffs back and forth. And we just love it. If there's a new joke in the show, I'm energized the whole day. I worked last night. I can't wait to get there,
And where did that change come from? From no jokes to jokes?
There was a philosophical element to my early stand-up in a way. And now there's no philosophical element at all. Mm-hmm. It's just fun. Mm-hmm. So I was, in college, I was inspired artistically to think differently and start from the ground floor and build it up. But then, I don't know, this is just fun. If I was working with someone else, maybe it'd be different. But I just like, what's our opening line?
Yeah.
The opening line, we'll be playing a place that'll have like 8,000 people in it, and the opening line is, Marty couldn't make it, have a safe ride home.
I was struck in the second half, no spoilers, your good friend Adam Gopnik says Steve has changed more than anybody he's ever met. And Morgan, can you tell us from your perspective that evolution, that constant change of Steve?
Well, as a filmmaker, you're hoping you have a subject who changes, and changes. I think about that line that Adam said a lot. I think it's so important to underline the journey that you've gone on. And, I think of the first film as this kind of creative, intellectual journey where you are doing a version of kind of performance art with your stand-up, and it's conceptual. And the second part is the emotional journey of trying to figure out, as we were working on it, we kept calling the second part the pursuit of happiness. It was trying to figure that out. And, something I really admire about Steve is that you...
Only one thing?
Sorry. Many. But but how, again, it's the perseverance. It's a version of that, which is the things you've done in your life, everything going back to, stand-up, magic, banjo. I mean, things that take tremendous investment of time to actually get better at. Steve put to trying to make himself happier and better. I mean, really, like, taking it seriously in a way and not just...
We have a joke on our show where Marty says, Steve Martin, he plays the banjo, he juggles, he does magic, and yet somehow he's famous.
And Steve, is that something that you were conscious of, the change, constant evolving?
Nope. Just felt like I loved the banjo, I wrote songs for the banjo, and you just do little things. I mean, actually, like my essay writing career called when the New York Times, there was a discovery of a Raphael statue in Manhattan. And they called the New York Times and said, could you maybe write something on this? And I thought, hey, I think I could write something funny. And so I wrote this piece and sent it back to them. And then I don't hear anything, and I don't hear anything, and I don't hear anything. So finally I say, what's with the piece? And they say, the editorial department and the arts department are fighting over it. So we're not going to run it. And I know that's bullshit, just complete, And so I sent it to the New Yorker, and then they published it. And then I thought, well, if I just write one, it's a one-off. It's a freak. So I have to write another to prove that the first one wasn't a fluke. So I write another one, and then that gets published. So then you go, if I just write two, it looks like, so that just got started on that little form. I just sent one in today. It's called Other Things RFK Jr. Could Have Done with the Bear. One of them was prop it up in the passenger seat and try to scam the HOV lane.
Morgan, I want to circle back to the fact that you had 2 crews, 2 composers, 2 editors. Can you tell us about that process and the challenges of having 2?
You don't want to go too long. I see people getting antsy. No.
Oh.
No, I think about that. I always know how this works. You're talking, everybody's interested, then you start to see this.
Well, maybe they have appointments, maybe they have a shrink to go to.
2:40, yeah. Oh, right. Maybe they're seeing.
Are you guys
mild
bored?
Shrink. Yeah. No.
Okay,
let's make it 5 more minutes.
Actually, I'm getting the wrap it up.
Oh,
over
you
there.
do?
You see that
you
red
got the
light
wrap it
over
up
there?
sign.
Yeah.
Yay. I'm enjoying this, but I worry about you. I do. I do worry about you. It's like, it was really good at first.
I will take that very personally. I will chalk it as part of my failures.
No, I don't mean you. You're not. I'm talking about me. I'm talking about time in general.
Yes.
You're doing great.
Well, thank you.
I mean, you are going to be the subject of Morgan's next biography.
Well, I doubt. Morgan, going back to you, and should we wrap it up? Let's wrap.
Did I really offend you?
No,
Oh,
no.
okay,
Are
good.
you kidding
All right,
me?
yeah,
I mean, I'm sweating over here, but
No, we got another, I'd say another 45 minutes.
No. We're after Morgan talks, we'll wrap it up.
But one thing I think I benefited from is that I'll give Steve the last word.
No, it should be 45 minutes. I'm sorry to interrupt. We started at 15 minutes after, so we can go another 20 minutes. Yeah. 45 is not too much.
No.
Let's round it off to an hour.
Working with 2 crews.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was kind of a post-production thing, but when we were shooting, we're just kind of gathering everything. I mean, the first, how I began this project, like I began a lot of projects, is I just came over to Steve's with a tape recorder, and we would just
Right.
talk for hours and hours, and I would just record conversations. So
Conscious of time, like you only have 30 minutes.
that's the great thing about just doing audio is kind of it doesn't matter, and you could stop and, so we did that, a number of times, and that was great just for me to start to figure out what the story is and how Steve sees the story. But I also think that I benefited from the fact that Steve's been an actor for so long, in that he has this idea of the director's job is here, and I will listen to what the director has to say. And I remember the first moment we started filming, you came out with 2 pairs of glasses. You said, should I wear the brown ones or the black ones? And I said, it's a documentary, Steve. Wear the black ones.
Yeah.
When I introduced the film, I was remiss to tell the audience that this documentary is nominated for 5 Emmys: Best Director, Best Film, and Best Documentary. Congrats.
Thank you.
And on that note, thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank
you
you,
so much.
Morgan.